they've asked me to record. So I'm going to start recording now, if that's okay with everyone. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as well. Okay, so this is my topic of my dissertation. And what you'll see here throughout this is exactly that we spoke about of your interest towards this is how do advisors really transform students into being student leaders, okay? Let's see here. So really what happened at the beginning of my journey as a doctoral student is something that fascinated and was my passion was student newsrooms. And what I found truly that there was a problem and that there was unknown scholarly work about leadership standards and how do student newsrooms have, what are the leadership skills, as well as it was unknown even what were what was the leadership curriculum. So ultimately there was a gap in the literature. There was a lack of editorial leadership research. And really what was available at the time was anecdotal and evidence on the individual high school news labs and showing what teaching leadership skills were and was. So what I did was I jumped in and worked to investigate, and much like journalists do as a researcher, find out across the state of Missouri what happens in student newsrooms to have advisors make leaders. So I had the opportunity to visit news labs across Missouri's public high schools that were actually established by the Department of Secondary Ed and Elementary Education. So what you're seeing here with the setting, the participants, the data collection, and data analysis was actually the criterion that I had to follow for this to be credible and ethical to have sound findings in the end. So the setting I selected was across the state of Missouri, but also was determined by MIPA's membership. And as you know, that membership actually separates the state into 4 different regions. And those 4 regions of Missouri are divided by Highway 50 and Highway 65. So part of my data collection was done by what's referred to as triangulating data through systematic observations. I would sit, I would look and see how, as a fly on the wall, what occurred in each newsroom. I actually conducted 24 different interviews with advisors. And I also did archival document and production review. I also wanted to see what the output was of each newsroom. The participants included selected MIPA award-winning advisors from across the state, like I mentioned. But that criterion was not just the award winners, but it had to be award winners by each school size and geographic region, really to ensure balanced and unbiased coverage. And the advisor had to be what you all are familiar with is the MIPA All Missouri Award. And I selected those advisors from the last 2 years that had received that award on the reflection of their news lab and their students. So of those 24 participants in the Missouri's 4 quadrants, in the current study that I'm going to talk about here, each advisor you're going to find out was actually used with a pseudonym to provide them with confidentiality with everything that you're going to see here. You're not going to see and be able to see with this presentation today because it is a qualitative study. We use pseudonyms to keep their confidentiality, but I used the school category to decipher school divisions. So what you'll see as we work through with school population and those pseudonyms, E names are going to represent extra large schools, which are 1,700 students or more. L names for large schools, and medium schools with 700 to 1 to 1,200 students, and S names for small schools, 1 to 700 students. And that is the same criterion that is used within MIPA. So we're gonna walk through now the results of this, but realize that once the data was collected, there was an analysis that had to be done of coding and according to themes and then utilizing a theory called transformational leadership to create the categories to connect to what's called my research questions. So moving forward, keep in mind there was reason to connect to the state of Missouri. Not only is because of the state that we love, the home of Mizzou, but really the Missouri is a good fit for research because lots of journalism history originated in Missouri. Walter Williams, which was actually mentioned by Suzette Hyman this morning during the opening remarks, he started Missouri School of Journalism at the University of Missouri in 1908. He was a driving force in supporting students to become journalists. And Williams actually founded MIPA, which is the organization we are being part of today, in 1923 to support high school journalism advisors. So over a century after Walter Williams developed the first journalism school in the world, he would have never probably predicted the vision you see in 2019, that vision that sparked, where we find the year of the student journalist, which was brought forward. So we see throughout time and within history, each puts forward a specific context for studying MIPA advisors. So as we're moving forward, Aurora and Mary, what we're finding here, the ultimate purpose of this study was to investigate news labs by finding skills that students gained by participating in leadership training programs, and also that significant role of journalism education in academic growth, and really stressing the need for school districts and secondary education that's invested in scholastic journalism initiatives. Ultimately, we're seeing here showcasing leadership dynamics involved in producing news in educational environments and the challenges of training, educating, and building student leaders. So once that moment of connecting those different pieces of, that problem and the gap in literature and finding that design and seeing the elements of how Missouri has such a history, I collected and made research questions to find out what the role of leadership played, what leadership skills are being taught, and what really are the advisors' perspectives. What do they think about teaching leadership? And how do advisors teach editorial leadership? And ultimately bringing back and finding out what components of transformational leadership theory are present in scholastic news labs. So what was found out ultimately here is that leadership plays a significant role. Soft skills are important in K through 12 journalism education, and advisors perceive a vital need to teach leadership skills through years of development. So really it revealed these perceptions is to define it, but also to provide advisors recommendations. Okay. So what we see here is this component of ultimately that when an advisor establishes leadership as that foundation, we find that news lab production increases, in that creativity is fostered and decision-making is delegated really to the students. And really leadership skills are important in journalism education. So what we're going to walk through now are just what we kind of spoke about at the very beginning about how the elements of these recommendations of all the data connected here. I know Aurora and Mary, you requested and thought is the components of what and how do you do this. So it ultimately came down to 4 recommendations, which Aurora and Mary, you probably really experience a lot in your environments of class already, perhaps, but educational editorial leadership really connects with engaging students, then teaching leadership, which empowers student leaders, and then impacts student leaders as well. So what does that mean when it comes to that recommendation of engaging student leaders? Well, advisors need to hold high standards for News Lab's entry, for creating that initial processes and looking for already developed leadership skills in their applicants. It's found within our within the research and the data is that it is necessary to start recruiting and have high entrance requirements for a News Lab. Even soft skills are not dictated within scholastic journalism curriculum standards. And so soft skills really were found to be critical to teaching journalism leadership by setting communication and social standards. And then mastering those soft skills is an intense focus on the professionalism to really help the News Lab have better communication and working with people. So ultimately, building those different components and different pieces to have high requirements, but also develop student journalists to have those hard skills of being able to have ethics, law, writing, using the technology and the equipment, but ultimately teaching those different soft skills of working with other people. So we find here Lydia, who was an advisor from a large school, that she felt that her students have a high accomplishment feeling just by coming into class, just by being permitted and being part of the newsroom, already being part of that community of learners. And Sandy, who is from a small size high school newsroom, looks for her kids' work ethic when it becomes part of her recruitment process. So moving into another component of engaging student leaders is about establishing teamwork. And the ways that advisors shared, establishing teamwork was also about working through the newsroom process, but it was also about having celebrations, also about having creative traditions and providing awards. While those advisors need to build a community of learners, the ritual celebrations were also needed within their News Lab production process, really to develop a team. And through those celebrations and creative traditions, advisors form those common bonds with their students and their staff members. So we find here Lucas, who is an advisor from a large high school newsroom, shared that he is going to recognize them by talking about what they did. And what they did was beyond what they expected the average student to do. He reflected upon the big accomplishments, but Emily, who was from an extra large sized high school newsroom, shared that she even was willing to celebrate and commemorate small victories. She shared a story about how she had a student who sadly was battling a drug addiction and getting through rehab. And so when she accomplished her goal, she was sure to celebrate it. So also, when it comes to that a new recommendation that we have here, it's about meeting and helping students learning and with their needs and with individual growth and determining their goals. And really it's about differentiating that instruction and working with students throughout. So we find here Sally, who is an advisor from a small high school, says, I said a lot of people use rubrics. She doesn't think she believes that her focus is more about seeing if her students are growing or not. Laura, who is an advisor from a large high school newsroom, said that she sees most of her kids go through 3 or 4 years of high school. And through that long range of time, she's able to see her students grow and see them be able to be leaders. So jumping into our next recommendation, and this may even start connecting to where you were requesting and thinking about Aurora, was the element of teaching leadership. And it comes down to that piece of accountability and defining leadership roles. News labs must have accountability with their leaders to ensure their motivation is maintained throughout the news lab. That accountability with clear expectations is a quality necessary for progress and sustained growth. And this is where the advisor needs student editors to be responsible for the news lab's workflow and ultimately be responsible for their end product. And we see here Elise from an extra large high school newsroom shared that she's constantly making sure her students are correct and on time. Mary shared there's a huge need for editorial leadership. She found that she just expects her kids to know they don't know. And even when shy when they ask for help, and be able to approach a student that hasn't turned in anything. Accountability was just evident through even observations that I had throughout my research and the interviews. Many advisors believe they must have accountability because it also ensures motivation for the news lab. So building upon that as well, it's accountability with clear expectations. So Mia shared that the goal is to get and to drive motivation, then the grade is not really a factor. It really comes down to the grade almost becomes secondary. So even that their passion and love for journalism is what shines through. Sarah shared that as she is the adult in charge, but at the end of the day, it's her kids that really take over and run everything. So we see here with that teaching leadership, it falls into the recommendation of motivating students with a shared vision and with continually shared goals. Motivation is that strong facet of how advisors teach leadership. Advisors must take on the daunting responsibility of leading all students to perform to the best of their ability. But the motivation really lays with their student editors to support the News Lab's vision overall. So what it comes down to is effective advisors have news labs that have a shared vision to motivate their leadership instruction, meet their rigorous standards, and reach potential then by maximizing in their students' strengths. And if you notice here, even mention is ways to motivate can be the continually shared goals, but even mottos that different newsrooms shared. Story is king, journalism 24/7, be coachable, for us, by us, journalism matters. Eli shared, it essentially establishes the leaders to believe in what they are doing. Liza shared, she loves when a student comes to her class with a D in English class. Then they arrive in her room and they become rock stars in journalism. They can edit, or they have a beautiful eye, and they can choose beautiful footage, or they're great talking to people. So motivating by finding those strengths in people. Sam shared, I love my job. Most teachers are in it because they love kids and they love their job. For me, for sure, it's the journey and how they feel while they go through the journey. Elizabeth shared, I can teach all the skills students need, but you can't teach passion. There's something about working hard until it works. You're going to have the bad days, the bad interviews, but when it finally clicks and comes all together, it's really cool to be part of that with all my students. So we're jumping now into our recommendation 3, empower student leaders. So here we see supporting student decisions, giving positive feedback. Advisors create nurturing environments by helping students make those decisions to take action. Empowering students develops as journalists is vital within editorial leadership. Advisors must build nurturing news labs so students learn leadership behaviors. Creating a safe environment helps journalism students to seize the moment and take risks in their coverage. So Leah shared, the kids feel they're in a safe place here, that they're allowed to be who they are, like really who they are. It's making sure they feel validated, acknowledged. Eleanor shared, it's their place. I work really hard to make this their safe haven from home. They spend so much time and effort pouring so much of their heart and soul into our publication. So part of that third recommendation of empowering students is taking action to inspire news coverage, experimenting even with media audiences and production. The root of creating a safe environment is the advisor helping students trust their own decision. Once students trust their own decisions, advisors must push their students to take action so they can create more meaningful student news. Lucy shared, okay, it's 11:17 and the class is starting, and at 11:30, our superintendent of our entire school district will be in for an interview. Lucy enjoyed sharing how she loves to challenge her students, but trusting that her students can handle any moment with anyone. Sloan shared, people say, oh, wow, that company is helping out. I have community members from our local newspaper come in. Both Lucy and Sloan shared how they bring people in to her newsroom and send her students out of their newsroom, trusting that those key initiatives, stories, and projects can be accomplished because she has leaders in her newsroom. Ellen shared the entire, she sent a student down to the airport on a Saturday, and actually those students came back and they had formatted the clip and they didn't have what they needed. But she didn't punish them. She was actually proud they tried and gave them grace to try again. So honestly, part of taking action is also permitting students to try and not do it perfectly, and sometimes fail and then send them out and do it again. Erin's an advisor that trusts her students to do challenging and professional level topics as gun safety, human trafficking. And ultimately, these advisors shared when they experiment and take risks, even when there is a chance of failure. Erin's News Lab here published once a quarter and is inserted within the community newspaper, even though she and her staff feel very vulnerable. She really here shares with her quote how it's actually a positive impact. So as we're still moving forward into now our fourth and last recommendation, it's about impacting student leaders. And part of that is harnessing enthusiasm, developing a sense of pride. Essentially, advisors must be impactful leaders to their students. And then advisors must be impactful leaders for their students, high schools, and even communities. Those advisors ought to impact their students through their enthusiasm, influence, building trust to be leaders. So here we see Emma sharing that we work on it together in a hands-on approach. We are a team together. This is how my staff becomes united and a team player atmosphere. Lexi shared, I love journalism. I'm passionate about storytelling. So part of that harnessing enthusiasm, Madison shared, student feedback was there, so I supported them and we went for it. Mia shared, if you're doing well, then the thing that you create will be the proof of that you're living what your central mission or idea is. The publication itself becomes a vehicle to bring in students that also have those same interests and passions. So part of that building trust with impacting student leaders is having a relationship. The advisors treat their editors like adults and be authentic. And they have open communication with their editors. Advisors' personal connections with their editors really help the News Lab's production and their teaching experience. So we see here building trust. Eva shares, initially, sometimes she says she's filled with anxiety, but then she realized her editors would be able to handle the heavy lifting to keep us moving, even when she had to be gone in emergency. And Sarah shared, I was not going to be there. I needed to call her to let her know because we were on deadline. So it was a little stressful for me, but good to know they were prepared for it in safe hands with my editor. So the data collected really reflected how trust between an advisor and an editor may be leveraged to even influence the news lab's overall trust. So the significance of all of this and this study comes down to giving and leading to up-to-date curriculum, skills, and standards. And findings can be presented to schools administration, other teachers, and ultimately more advisors to be encouraged and how to inspire their students to become leaders. So ultimately, we see here, findings will continue to be presented to administration, teachers, and ultimately students, and to be encouraged and inspired to become leaders. Ultimately, developing editorial leadership approaches to journalism education can help educators to seize the moment to create alternate models of journalism to invigorate advisors and inspire students. So thank you so much. And any questions? I'd like to take some time here and really see what your thoughts are, Aurora and Mary, and just have a conversation of any questions you may have. Aurora, let's address maybe your question here specifically about how you can take on the piece here of editorial leadership. How did this maybe help, or do you have more questions?
I don't have any more questions, or like, I had a question, I put that in chat.
See it now. Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
So in the J Labs that you went to, what did you find worked best for the students that you worked with or saw? So like, what process did their like classroom take on that you think worked really well?
Yeah, great. Good question. Ultimately, when it came to those student editors and those leaders, what was the piece that I kept seeing in many news labs over and over again was there was a core group of students that considered themselves what I'll refer to as an editorial leadership team. And these students came together as leaders and had the title as leaders in their group, but they met outside of their class time or their production time, and in many different ways took on conversation, but they also took on almost a debriefing process with their news lab. And it was a chance for them to support each other, but ultimately support their direct reports. Does that help?
Yes.
Do you have anything like that in your newsroom now?
I sadly have been online all year, so I don't know. I haven't been really able to see the rest of staff like in person very often. But there definitely is, like, the editors will text me and stuff outside of school time to work on things.
Yes. Well, and I will tell you, we here at UCM, dipping into the COVID environment, I will say my research was done literally before COVID. So I was able to go in and see how it was in that rationale of that type of learning and educational environment. But again, it comes back to taking risk as one of those recommendations, and perhaps still doing the element of an editorial leadership team, but take the risk of doing it virtually. I would suggest, built upon the data and those recommendations, is try and use technology to the best of the abilities you can, and just keep trying. Allow yourself to make a mistake or a failure and work with the support of your advisor. But ultimately, what I think was shared the most with the perspectives of the advisors was, I support and trust my editorial leadership team. And if they want to try something, if it's not breaking the law or it's unethical, I will support them. Yeah. All right. Anything else? All right. I'll double check the chat to see if we have any other questions. All right. Well, unless there's anything else, I really appreciate your time today. And again, as I mentioned, feel free to reach out if you have any other discussion points or any other follow-up. I appreciate you sitting in and talking about my research. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I liked listening. Thank you.
Great. I'm so glad. It was great to connect. And I appreciate your passion, ladies, for journalism. Onward. Have a great wrap up of the year.
You too.
All right. See you later.